Hi, in this video we're going to do a tutorial on dependency injection using the Spring Boot framework. So this is a course on web development with Java, and we're using Spring as our framework, and we're going to do a whole comprehensive study of how to build web apps. We're on this third section here, which is called dependency injection. And so I'm going to show you some controllers, some services, and several ways to inject them, and why you would do this, and then also many of the errors that appear on your screen when you're trying to do this. My name is Shad Sluter, and I teach software development at Grand Canyon University. So this channel represents a huge amount of work that goes on in the classroom where I teach, and successfully bringing students into the world of professional software development. So please subscribe and come along. So this video is going to focus on the idea of services and then injecting them into a controller. So there's a lot of concepts here that you need to understand before we start writing some code. So let's begin by thinking about how the n-layer design works. This is really the modular approach that most software developers take when they're building an application. So starting at the top, we have the page, which is usually HTML format. Then we have a controller. And then below the controller are services. And a service can do anything from calculating taxes to fetching data to rendering graphics or any kind of a computation that you can think of. And then frequently below that is the data service, which is connected to a database. So we're eventually going to get to data services, but in this video we're going to hardwire some things in our business service. So the control flow usually goes like this. The controller asks the business service to do something. The business service then talks to the data layer. The data layer talks to a database. And then we start going back up. And so the response comes back that says, hey, here's your data. Then the data service replies to the business service and says, here's your data. And then the business service does some kind of a computation on that. And then finally, the controller would pass it on to a front-end template, such as TimeLeaf. And so this flow is what we're going to be designing in our application. In this video, we're only going to be focused in on the services layer. So we'll get to data access in future videos, but one thing at a time. So we're going to see how we would not only program these services, but how to use dependency injection. So here's an example of a controller that has a service. You can see that we're trying to show all orders, and we are going to rely on the order businesses service to do that. So there's a method in that class called getOrders. Then we pass along the orders into a model, and then we pass the model off onto a template, and then the user gets to see all of the orders in our plan. So we've mentioned dependency injection. Let's give an example of what it is and why programmers prefer to use it. So first of all, take a look at this service. Suppose this is the orders controller, and we need access to an order business service. So, as an object-oriented trained student, you would like this line here that says, hey, you need an order business service? Make me a new one. So newing up, or making a new instance of an order service, is really what we're trying to avoid. The reason we're trying to avoid this is we are trying to reduce the dependency of one class on another. You see, if you don't have the order business service in your project, then this class cannot be compiled. And so they are tightly linked with each other. So we're trying to avoid that. Here is the way that you're going to see it done in just a few minutes. The same controller has the same method, but notice that the order business service doesn't have any kind of a new behind it. No new statement. But instead it uses this cryptic auto-wired. So what is auto-wired doing? Well, auto-wired is going to allow the Spring framework to go and find the service for us automatically. And so we don't need to create this new statement. Really, that's what dependency injection is. Avoiding the item at the top and reprogramming it to look like the one below. So let's take another reason of why we would want to do that. So consider a controller. The controller might be using a business service of different versions, such as one for production or one for testing. You might have a business service that is programmed for preferred customers or for a certain region of the world. And if you program it correctly, you can swap out any of these services with a single line of code. And so we're trying to create something modular that allows you to customize your application without having a great deal of dependency of one class upon another. Now let's talk about how the program determines which service gets to inject into the controller. So I have an example here of 3 business services. We'll call them 1, 2, and 3. And they all are eligible to be injected. So because we've got them programmed in our application, the big question is, Spring Boot, which one are you going to choose? If you have all 3 of them programmed and they're all set up to be configured as services, then you're going to get an error on your computer screen that says, don't know which one you mean, tell me which one is your primary. And so the first thing we're going to do is figure out how to identify one of these services as the currently active service, and then we'll inject it. So we're going to see this primary annotation in our code. So enough of these examples with diagrams. Let's go ahead and look at some actual code and make this happen. All right, so we've returned to our code editor. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate project 2-3 because it already has a login form and some things that we're going to use in future videos. So let's right click on this guy and let's choose copy. And then I'm going to press Control-V to paste. Now the name. So we're going to switch, we're on topic 3 now. So I'm going to call this 3-1. And so we'll give it a second to let the copy and paste process work. So we need to change a few things that are in our project to match the new title 3-1. So let's open the Java folder, and I'm looking for the package called ComShadSluter, or whatever your name is. And inside of there, you're going to find the topic application with a number in it. So let's refactor that. So we'll right click on it, choose rename, and then we're going to name it as 3-1 instead of 2-3. Let's open it up to make sure that the actual renaming took place. And so we should see that the class name matches the file name. So when we open up the file, we notice that we have topic 3-1 application as the class name. Some more changes that we're going to have to make are in the POM file. So let's open up POM XML. Look for anything that says topic 2-3 and rename it. So we've got here a topic 2-3. We're going to name this 3-1. And then a couple more lines down later, we have another. So we're going to name that as 3-1. And I'm going to press the save. So we're trying to create a service for a bunch of orders. We don't have an orders object yet, so we're going to go into the models folder and right click, choose a new class, and we're going to make a model. We'll name it order model. So let's give our order a couple of properties. We'll start off with the ID number, and we'll make this a long property instead of an int. So this turns out to be better in the long run. And we're going to create a string for its order number, so it can be both letters and digits. Then we're going to create a product name, and then a price, which will be the float property. And then finally, we're going to create a quantity, and so we use integer. So we have a variety of things: longs, integers, floats, and strings. Now let's let the program do most of our coding for us. So let's first of all create a constructor. So right-click below the properties, choose source, then generate a constructor using the fields. So we'll use all of the properties and click generate. We're probably going to print these things, so let's create a toString method. So we'll do the same process. Right-click, choose source, and generate a toString. Make sure that you select all the properties. Lastly, we need getters and setters. So the same thing. Right-click, choose source, generate getters and setters. Make sure you select all of them. Click go. And then we have all of the code that we need. So some 55 lines that was made for us. So we scroll back to the top and we can see that we have a constructor. Then we have a toString method. And then we have the getters and setters. Looks good. So the model is finished. So now we're going to have that model be displayed in a web page eventually. So using our MVC pattern, we have to create a controller. So let's right-click in the controllers area and choose a new class. This new class will be called the orders controller. In order to tell Spring Boot that this is actually a controller, you don't just rely on the class name. You have to put an annotation at the top. So @controller goes first. And we're also going to tell the controller which URLs we're trying to intercept and to operate on. So that's called your request mapping. And so anything in the URL that has a /orders will be handled by this controller. So now we have to import both of these. So import the one that's closest to the class name first, and then that's called the request mapping. And then the other annotation is the controller. So both of these are imported from the class libraries. So let's create a method that will respond to something that will show all of the orders in our system. So a good name for this is called show all orders, and it's going to return a string. So let's put in the parameter, a model, so that way we can insert some data, and then we're going to return a web page that is yet to be created. We'll call it orders.html. Looks to me like there's some imports to do, so we'll go to the model class and choose an import. Now we also have to tell it what kind of request that this method will handle, and so we'll choose a get mapping. So you notice I don't have any kind of a string there, so this means if orders is put in and there's no trailing slash, then it will handle it. I could optionally put in here a slash, and so that way the user has to put the slash. So it's up to you of what kind of behavior you're looking for on your application. So in this version of the application, we're just going to have everything done in the controller. So there's no services yet, there's no layers going on. We're just going to generate this through hard-coded lists. So let's create a list, and of its type is order model, and we'll name this list as orders. And we'll create a new empty list, so it's an array list. Now we got a lot of importing to do, of course, so we import lists, we import the order model class, and then we have to import array list. So all of these imports make the errors go away. So now let's add some orders to the list. So we'll go orders.add. And inside the parentheses, we'll create a new instance of an order model. So this is going to be a bunch of adventure things. So for the first order, let's do an ID of 0 and the order number of 000. So one's a string, one is a long. Then for the description, we'll call this thing a skydiving experience. And we'll give it a price, which is a float. So we add an F to the end of our number. And then finally the quantity, which is the last item in the constructor. So we'll just have one of these available. So all of these will create a new instance of an order model, and we'll add it to the list. So now that we have one order, we can copy and paste. So let's make about, let's say 10 different examples of orders. So copying and pasting, and then we're going to go back and renumber everything. So I'm going to use the ID number as in sequence. So let's go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and it looks like up to 10. Then for the order number, you can have this as a string to be any kind of a identifier. So I'm going to use the same string as the actual number. So 001, 002, etc., all the way up to 010 for 10. Now for each of the events, I'm looking for something exciting. So we're going to go from the idea of not only doing skydiving, but let's try Run with the Bulls in Pamplona in Spain. Or let's say orbit the moon with SpaceX. So you give me some cool ideas on what adventure sounds good to you. How about shot from a cannon? That sounds interesting. Now I'm going to adjust the price for each of these so that way they reflect kind of the cost of the real thing. What else could we do? How about zip line the Grand Canyon? That would be quite a thing if there was such a zip line. How about the whole enchilada in Moab? Now that's in Utah. A great bike riding tour through the Red Rocks. And then wingsuit jumping lessons. Let's do that in Norway. Seems like I see a lot of those on Instagram and TikTok. Backpacking to the peak of Kilimanjaro. So make sure you do that before all the glaciers melt away. How about sled race, the Iditarod? Or maybe scuba dive, Jellyfish Lake in Palau, where you can swim with millions of harmless jellyfish. Or maybe your idea of a good day is lemonade by the pool with a book. So add some items here and add a price, and then show how about the number of packages that are available, number of orders that can be done. So this data here is pretty much filler data, but we want to have a significant number, let's say 10 or more, where we can generate some items for a table. Now the last thing we have to do is send this to our orders page. So we're going to use the model parameter and add an attribute. So I'm going to use two attributes just to remind ourselves that attributes can be many. The first one is the title of the page, and I'll put the title in as, "Here is what I want to do this summer." And then I'm going to add a second attribute. So let's go and add this one as orders. And we're going to send the list this time. So orders with the quotation marks means that's the parameter name that we're sending. That's the property or attribute name. And then the list of orders is the items that we've been adding up until now. Then finally, we're going to return the orders.html page. So orders.html better be prepared to handle all the data that we just sent to it. Now let's go look in our folders over here on the left side. You can see that in our resources area and then the templates has nothing at all about orders.html. So obviously we need to create that so that we can display this information. Otherwise we'll get an error when we run the app. So we're not quite ready to test yet. Let's create the orders page first. So I'm going to right click in the templates area and choose add. Now you can choose file if you want, but I'm going to select other because in this IDE, this text editor, there is an HTML starter file. So I'll just choose HTML as my start. And then I'm going to name it as orders.html. So when I'm done, I have some starter code and we can begin to create a table. So let's put in a to-do list of things that we're going to accomplish on this page. First of all, we have two properties. The first property is the title. So we want to insert the title somewhere on this page. The second is we're going to put a table and display all of the orders in our table. Then thirdly, we're going to include this in the default layout. So we have the nav bar at the top of the screen. So the default layout is something we created in the previous video. And we'll just have to add one line of text to make this happen. So let's go find some starter code for a table. So I'm going to go to Bootstrap and find the section under the docs called content. So when I look at the tables, I can scroll down and see that there are lots of different examples to copy. So this first one is the standard one. We could just copy this, so I'm going to click it right now. So it's copied to the clipboard and I'm going to use that code. However, there are other variations that we could choose. So we can see that there's colors. If you want to select a colored items, they have all them named here. You can see that there's accented tables, there's dark. All you have to do if you want to add dark is you slip in this right here. If you want table striped, you add this item, and then you've got yourself a different style with very little work to do. So since I've copied this first table, I'm going to switch back into my code editor now, and I'm going to paste it right there. So the code is a starter code. It does not contain the information that I really need, but it's a pretty good start. So let's scroll back up to the top of the table. And the first thing I'm going to do is add the table-striped attribute. So my table will have alternating gray and white stripes. Add others if you want, such as table dark or something else. You decide, and go back into the styling guide at Bootstrap and pick one of their classes. So using our knowledge of what the HTML format is of a table, we start at the top where it's got T-head. That stands for the table header. Inside of there is a row, which is a TR, and then each item in there is a TH. So TH stands for a header column. And so I'm going to name the first one as ID, the second one as order number, the third is the name, then price, and then the quantity. And so all of these headers match with the properties of the object called order model. Now let's scroll down and look at the table body. You can see that there were 3 rows provided to us. And so we don't need all 3 of those. I'm going to delete the second and the third one. And so now we just have a single row to go on. Now instead of putting a bunch of static rows in, I'm going to dynamically generate them. So in the TR tag, I'm going to add a for each loop. So that is the time leaf for th colon each. Inside of the parentheses, or the quotation marks, I should say, inside the quotation marks, we put a variable called order. And then we are going to get it from the parameter of the object that was sent to us. So orders is one of the 2 properties that was sent to this page. And so we put a $, curly bracket, and then the variable name orders. So this creates a for loop that we can do to generate multiple rows. So we're going to get about 10 rows since there are 10 objects in the orders list. So then for each row, we're going to have multiple data items, which is TD. And so the tag has to include a time leaf insert. So th colon text is what we're going to use for each of these. Now we're going to have the property called order.id. So make sure that you put it in quotation marks, $, and then you have the open curly bracket. Order, not orders, but order.id is the property. So let's copy and paste this now that we have an example to follow, and let's put in the other properties that are in our order model. So we have order number, we have product name, price, and the quantity. So all of these are just taken directly out of the order model. This will dynamically create a table, and it should show in a nice striped format. We have another property that we sent to this template. It's called the title of the page. And I believe this was called, these are some things I want to do this summer. So let's insert that above the table. We'll put an H2 tag in and use th colon text as the insert. So when we look at our goals that we set out to do, we've inserted the title, and we've also inserted a table for the orders. We still have to add this to the default layout, but we can test this before we try step 3. So I'm going to save this and rerun the app. So I'm going to right-click on the project name and choose Run as a Spring Boot app, and let's see if this actually runs. So let's dial in a web page, and let's go to the URL and type in localhost colon 8080 / orders and another trailing slash. What do we get? We get our table. So it says, here's what I want to do this summer, and we have the table. Now the formatting's not there, but we do have all the data. So far, so good. When we add this into the default layout, we should see the HTML formatting using Bootstrap. So let's go back and change that. So what we need to do then at the very top of the page in HTML is add one more item. Now I've already forgotten how this works, so I'm going to go back and look at a previous page that we did. So let's go look in the login form and let's see what we did there. So here is the code I'm missing. It's called layout decorate, and then it has all the items that say specifically we're going to use the default layout. So this looks to me like the code that I need, so let's copy it and let's go back to the orders page and paste it inside of HTML. So this should provide us with HTML, a nav bar, a footer, and also include the CSS. So I'm going to switch back into my page. You notice I don't have to restart the app. I can just refresh it, and hopefully we get exactly what we want. Okay, so it didn't work. I forgot something else, obviously. We've got a message that says, replace this with a page that has fragment equals content. Forgot that one, didn't I? So I put that note in there for a reason, is because we need that. So what part of this needs the content? So we need to copy this layout fragment equals content and put it somewhere on our page. Well, let's create a new div that goes around our table and our H2. And we'll paste in this new statement that says layout fragment equals content. And then we'll put one at the end where a closed div will capture the end of this. Now, since this is a partial page, I don't really need to put all the rest of this stuff in here. So I'm going to go to the bottom, wipe out body, go to the top, and we have all the rest of this, so we can take out body and head and all the rest of it. And we've got ourselves just the minimal code that we need. So let's take a peek at this. Content should be probably spelled with a T, shouldn't it? So let's make sure we put a T in there. And then we're ready to go on to check the page now. So let's switch back into our browser, and I'm going to refresh the page. And sure enough, we get the entire content. So we've got ourselves a striped page, and it looks like all of the data that I chose is showing up on the page. Very good. We got ourselves a template with a table. So very nice. If we look at our controller, it's doing exactly what we told it to. We created an orders list, and we sent two different properties, two different attributes, a title and our orders list, and it successfully displayed in the orders page. Now, as you might recall, one of the points of this lesson was to create what we call services. And so a service is the idea that we can have layers in our application. We have a controller, but you don't see this business service in action yet. So we are supposed to get some data from the business service and then return it to the top of the stack. So this code on the screen right now is where we're going. So we're going to have a list of orders. We're going to send it to our page. However, we're not going to define all of the items in that list in this class. So we're going to define another class called the order business service, and it will have a method called getOrders. And this will condense our code here and provide another class with his own job to do. So in essence, we want to eliminate all of these lines right here where we are creating the content in the controller. So we're going to need a new package because we're going to have multiple pieces to make this work. So we're going to create a package called services, and this will include interfaces and several classes. The first item that we're going to add into this package is called the order business service interface. So I'm going to right click and choose new and pick interface. So the interface is the plan. It's the promise of what you're going to create in a class. So it's not a class itself. It's just kind of a design pattern that we're going to follow. So inside of this order business service interface, we are going to create several things. The first one, I'm just going to put in a test method. So we'll have it as a void test. And the only thing we're going to use this for is to print things. So we're going to print some confirmation messages that things are working properly. Then we're going to have to create something to be able to retrieve all of our orders. So a good name for that is called getOrders. And the return type is a list of order model. So that is, once again, just the interface. It's the design promise that says another class will implement this method. We have to import these things, of course. Now let's talk about some of the future plans that we're going to add to our application. So this is a CRUD app, right? A create, read, update, delete app. And so I'm going to mention a few things that will probably be needed in the future. We're not going to program them yet, but we'll think about them because they're coming. So the first is we'll probably want to be able to search our list. So search orders make sense to me, and a parameter called search term, which is a string, will be needed so we know what we're looking for. Then we're going to have an item called add order, so we can add one item to it. So we'll send in a new model, and that will simply append it to the list of things that are already stored. Then we're going to have to delete one. We're going to have to identify what to delete by its ID number. So that's a long. And then we're going to have an update. So if we want to change an order, we can send a new order to it, and it will modify the properties, such as his name or price or quantity, anything like that. And then finally, we're going to have a get single order or get one order. And so if we have an ID number and we just want to show one of them, then return one. So I'm leaving these as comments because we don't want to take the time right now to implement all of these. We'll save that for later. But just to keep us on track, we know where we're going. Now, the reason why we're building this as an interface is that we're going to have multiple versions of an order business service. So we're only working with the first version right now, and so we're going to add that class next. So let's go right-click in the package where the services are, and we'll choose a new class. Now the new class, we're going to call it as Orders Business Service. Go ahead and click Finish. Now the first thing I want to do is to tell it that this is implementing the Orders Business Service interface. So in the first line, we put in the word implements, and then spell it exactly as we needed to. We type in Orders Business Service Interface. As soon as we do, we see an error. It says under the name of our class that this interface implements several methods. We know what the two methods are. One was called tests and the other one was called getOrders. So let's choose the first option under the suggestions that says add unimplemented methods. And we get the exact same statements that we just typed a minute ago. We have test, and then the second one is called getAllOrders. So if you haven't seen interfaces before, this is a quick reminder that that's the plan, and now we're implementing them. Notice the word override is important. It tells us that we are using the exact name of the method from the interface. Now, in the test area, I told you that this is only going to be used for our console to be able to see if things are working properly or not. So I'm going to just print a message that says Order Business Service is working. We might not need this, but I just added it for testing. Now, the second item, where it says Get Orders, we're going to delete the content that's in there, and we're going to simply swipe what we created in the controller a few minutes ago. So this is going to return a list of orders. Well, we've already got that code, so let's go back into the orders controller, and we're going to generate all of that. So let's cut out all of the code that you see here, It's gone. And now switch back into our new class and paste it. So let's see if this works. So we're going to generate a new list. We're going to fill it with all of these adventure packages. What's missing? We don't have a return statement, so we need to say return orders, because the type of return is up here, a list of order model. And when we return orders, it fulfills that return type. So save this, and now we have moved all of this code generation out of our controller and into a service class. So let's go back to the controller now. So can he get his job done? We don't have orders anymore. Orders has disappeared. So we need a list of orders. So inside this method, we're going to add a new statement for orders again. So orders is supposed to be a list of type order model. And I'm going to get it from somewhere. So I put an equal sign. Now, how do I get it? Well, I need to create an instance of this service. I'm going to do it wrong the first way and then show you how to use what's called dependency injection. Now, the first way that I'm going to do this is just create an instance of the orders business service. So on the previous line, I'm going to say, give me something called service of type order business service and make a new instance of it. And then we can use this service as a way to fetch all the orders. So we say service.getOrders. So I'm going to add some comments above this statement called order business service to let you know that this is now creating a dependency. So one class depends on another, which is considered bad code styling. We're going to change this later into dependency injection, but for right now, we're going to learn one concept at a time. So I'm going to test this out. I'm going to right-click on the project again and choose Run as Spring Boot App and watch the console, and it appears that everything is green or whatever color it's supposed to be. Let's come back to the page, and we should be able to just do a refresh, and hopefully we have no errors. So we didn't accomplish anything as far as the user's front-end experience goes, but we can see that we have isolated the service now to another class. All right, now it's time to go back to dependency injection and see if we can implement this. Now remember, dependency injection was the idea that we're trying to avoid this statement here, where we create a new instance of a class inside of another class. That's a dependency, which is less modular than we would prefer. What we're going to do is move it to something that looks like this. We're going to add an item at the top of the class and label it as auto-wired. And we are going to avoid having this new statement in there. So it's automatically going to be inserted using what Spring Boot Framework is designed to do. So let's see if we can code this and make it happen. Okay, so in the code editor, I am going to then cut out the code that generates the new instance. And let's move it up to the very top of the class of the controller. We're going to paste it in. And we're going to delete the right half of this where we're creating the new instance. So we've got something as a property now of our class. It's called service. Next, we're going to add this annotation called auto-wired. So auto-wired is a signal to the Spring Boot framework that says, go find this class called orders business service and give me a new instance of it. And so we don't have to create that instance ourselves. The framework does it for us. So this is almost correct. Let's run it and see if there's any errors. So I'm going to restart the app and watch the code at the bottom of the screen. Okay, so as predicted, I said we're going to find a problem. Let's go down and look at the console to see what's going on. It says here, our application failed to start. And it says you tried to do something that is going to require a bean of orders business service. And that could not be found. So I forgot to do something. I thought auto-wired was supposed to fix everything, right? Let's see if there's something that needs to be done. It says here, consider adding a bean of type order business services in your configuration. So how do I do that? That's a nice description of a problem, but what's the solution? The solution is really simple at this point. We need to go back to the order business service and tell one item at the very top. So here on line 7, we have to put in another annotation that says, treat this class as a service. So I'm going to type in service. Now I could also use the word component Either one of those will work properly, but service is more semantically correct, and so we're going to choose service. All right, so now that we add this service here, let's go ahead and restart the app and see if we have any more success than we did before. Okay, so this time, as I look at the console messages down here, it says that everything is good. So let's switch over to our browser, and I'm going to refresh the page using the orders page. And sure enough, I get the same list. So the table is now working. So just recap what we did here. The orders business service needs to have this annotation called service. And then the controller is able to find it when we have the auto-wired item here. So this is called inserting by dependency injection. Now there's one other suggestion that many programmers would follow is instead of adding an auto-wired to a property here, they create a constructor and then use the property. So let me show you what I mean. So this is just a different way to set up the class. We don't have a constructor on this class. Let's go ahead and create one. So I'm going to right-click, choose Source, generate a constructor using fields. And the only field on this class right now is this property called service, or order business service. Once we have the constructor, then we're going to remove the auto-wired from the property at the top into the orders controller constructor. So I think this works. Let's just go ahead and rerun the app, and let's see if there's any errors that show up in the console. So no errors. We've got a constructor and we're using auto-wired there. So either one of those two different ways to do auto-wired is acceptable. And the second one that I have here with the constructor apparently works better with unit testing. Even though that's not part of our course right now, it's a common method and how people program. So I'm going to leave it here as a constructor with auto-wired at the constructor level. Okay, so now we see we have an interface that was designed to show us that we have to have get orders in our method. Then we implemented that using the order business service, where we created a bunch of junk down here, which is about adventure packages for the summer. Next, I want to create a second version of the order business service, and we'll be able to swap one of these out for the other. So I'm going to right-click and choose Copy on the order business service, and then make a paste. We'll call this thing Order Business Service 2. So very original name. Let's open up and look at it. Right now, of course, it looks identical to the previous one. It just has a different name. But both of these have the statement that says implement the interface. So now you can see why an interface is important. You can have multiple classes that implement it. So Order Business Service 1, Order Business Service 2, both have the same name methods as the interface. Now I'm going to modify the contents of this service. So instead of having adventure packages, I'm going to make some junk food. So let's rename the first one as Big Mac and adjust his price to something reasonable for what a Big Mac might cost you. The second item, let's switch from whatever adventure we were trying to think of, and we're now going to enjoy large fries. And then the third one, let's go with a full meal here. Let's try chicken nuggets, and then let's go with a Coke, and then finally an apple pie. So we've got ourselves a fully junk food meal. Now, just to be different, I'm going to name all of the order numbers as a string of letters instead of digits. This is a string after all. So let's go with AAA, AAB, and so on all the way up to AAE. Lastly, I look at my thing and it says code. It's actually supposed to be a Coke, right? Okay, so now we've got ourselves an Order Business Service 2. And we should be able to use this now in our program. So now let's switch back into our controller. And let's look at the service that we created here. So we are specifying Order Business Service, and if I wanted to swap that out, I could put a 2 and then import that, and I would have a new Order Business Service. This would show me the junk food instead of the other. So this is not quite the way we want to do things, but it does show that this is swappable. Instead of swapping it like this, I'm going to change the item name to the interface. So I'm going to rename this item. Instead of saying Order Business Service or Order Business Service 2, I'm going to put in the name of the Order Business Service interface. So now either one of these can be injected into here as a service. Also, I'm going to use this Order Business Service interface as part of the Orders Controller constructor. And let's save it and see if anything happens in the console. So sure enough, down in the console, we see we have an error. So it says here, the application failed to start again. What went wrong? Well, putting the interface in here leaves us open to now two possibilities for how this service will be implemented. Is it orders business service, or is it order business service 2? And that's the ambiguity that we see in the error message. Let's see what it says down here. Now, I like the way that always we get these cryptic error messages. It says parameter 0 of the constructor required a single bean. What else does it say? But it says 2 were found. So that's exactly what I was trying to describe to you. And the 2 that were found are listed down here. It says order business service is defined and order business 2 is also defined. So it says both of these are candidates. What are we going to do? Well, it says here, consider making one of them as primary. And then we are able to define which one gets the first choice. So primary. Well, let's go and look at these two. So I've got 2 coming up here. Let's say I want this one to be the primary one now. So I just go up to the top where it says service, and I put an @ symbol, and I type in the word primary. And let's see, we have to do some importing to make this work. And then we'll save the class again. And let's see if the app will work. So now I see in the console, we've got no problems. It knows now that primary is set to business service 2. So let's go ahead and go back to the website and refresh the page. And this time, instead of adventure packages, we get Big Macs and large fries. So it is now injecting our second service using a interface and the word primary. Okay, so let's try and confuse the program a little bit more. What happens if you mark both of them as primary? Well, that's probably not going to work too well. So let's come back into the first service and mark him as primary. So we're going to argue now about who is really primary. Who's first? So let's import our primary annotation, save it, and watch the console to see what shows up. Now the reason why I'm showing you all these errors is because when I teach this in my courses, I see all of these things happen, and so we might as well see them now in the instructions. It says here we've got a problem. It says we are error creating the bean. It's defined here. Probably somewhere along in this message there's going to be a item that says 2 different primaries. There it is, available. More than one primary bean is found among the candidates. So you can't have 2 primaries. Obviously, only one of them gets to be used. So we could solve this by removing primary from one of the services. Let me show you another way that you could do this. We could identify one of them to be injected and not the other. So I'm going to remove primary from both of them. So let's go from 2 and 1 and knock out the word primary and save it. Let's go back to the controller. So instead of using the word service, we could have named this as one of the classes that the service implements. So instead of using primary, we could just rename the instance itself. Spring is smart enough to know that if we call this thing order business service, it's going to pick the right one. So let's do a right click and choose refactor, and we're going to name this thing as order business service. And so anywhere the word service is in the list, it's going to be replaced now with order business service. So I'm going to copy and paste that for both the parameters and for the properties. And let's see if it'll take it. Let's run the app again. So now it runs. Even though there's no indicator for which one is primary, it knows because of the name that I chose. So I should be able to try this with the other. So let's put a 2 in there. And now instead of the property being called service or order business service, let's see what happens. We run it again, and once again, there are no errors. So that is kind of a funny way to do it, but it does work if you have the right file name. Now I want to show you a third method, which might actually be the preferred from many software developers. So I'm going to rename everything back to where it was. It's order business service and the word service here, and interface and service here, as well as down the page, I think it just says service. So all of these renamings brings back us to the original problem where we have an issue that says you've got nobody called the primary. So another way to fix this other than adding primary is to set up a config file. So to make this happen, let's go make a new class. Let's go to find com.shadsluder and let's do a right click and choose new class. The class name I'm going to call Spring Config. And this is where we can do things such as indicate which bean is the primary bean. So to indicate that this is a configuration file, we put in an annotation, as you guessed it, at configuration. And so now we're going to put in some properties here that the entire app will follow. So inside of this Spring config, we're going to create a new method. And we're going to put an annotation on it called bean. So the name of the bean is called order business service. Obviously, this is the service we're working with. So we want to have a method here that is going to get the order business service. And we're going to say the return type is of order business service interface. So at this case, that there are two possible return types. One is a business service and the other one is the business service 2. So in this file, we're going to indicate which one of these two classes is going to be used. So I'm going to say order business service, and that's going to be the return item. So let's go ahead and restart the app, and we're probably going to see another error, and let's see what it is. So now it says we've got a different problem. So as I mentioned, I'm showing you all the errors that will likely occur as you build these apps. Now it says here, order business service that you've defined in this config class is already been used. So you can't define it here and somewhere else, in other words. So let's go back to our order business service and the 2, and let's take out this item that says service. So let's delete service here, and let's go find the other one and delete the service there. And so now these are no longer indicated as services in their annotation. Instead, they are shown in the Spring config file. Okay, so which do you prefer? This is the second way. Let's go ahead and save the results and see if I can relaunch the app and wonder if the application error goes away. Okay, it appears that the error went away, so it is now injecting this class for the service. Let's go ahead and run the app again. Let's see if we can refresh it and see what comes up. Sure enough, we have skydiving experiences. This is the first one. So then if I wanted to change which service I'm using, I simply go to the config file and put a 2 in there and save it. Oops, looks like I have to import it and then save it. Okay, then relaunch the application, and it appears that there's no errors. And so this time when I run the app, hopefully I see Big Macs. Sure enough, we've got junk food coming all the way through. Okay, remember the point of this lesson is to show that you can have multiple services that are going to be injected into your controller. And to be able to define which one of these gets to be the primary one, we can indicate it as @primary, and the other two are ignored. However, we needed to program this using an interface. So the interface allows us to define multiple versions of a service. We did the first item we called property injection, which is to show one single line, and then we had to use the word auto wired above it to make sure that that indicated that this thing is coming from another class. We changed that to show constructor injection, and then that was the preferred method because of future issues with testing. And then we wanted to indicate if there were two different services, one of them could be primary and the other one was not primary. A second way that we could have indicated which one should be used is the specific class name that we put at the title, so that if you spelled it letter for letter, the Spring Boot was smart enough to know which one we should pick. And then lastly, we used what was called Spring config plus a bean definition. So all of this is a lot of information, but it gives you the full package of the errors that you are likely to see as you're trying to do dependency injection with Spring Boot. In the next video, we're going to go into the data layer and start to work with databases and providing these services with a data access object. If this information is useful to you, make sure you subscribe, and that way you can come back and learn as well along with us. So you can become a software developer if you can master this content and then show your employers that you really know what's going on with modern Spring Boot. See you soon.